You got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me. Hurt my feelings.
Welcome back to another episode of Dynasty Theory. I'm John Bauer. Find me on X at the Bauer Club. You know we got Dan Lamagna at FF Coach Dan. What's going on, Dan?
JB, good to see you here tonight, man. Enjoying a little Monday Night Football as we record and, reflecting back on another weekend of highs and lows. We think we know it all at Dynasty Theory, and every once in a while the fantasy gods have something else to say. But looking into diving into some player takes today and hopefully helping our listeners out.
So we wanted to run through a few players. You go over to dynastydaddy.com, a few players that have been the most traded over the last week, and you'll see why they're the most traded whenever we get to them. It's a fantastic free resource, but obviously it gives you an idea of what some trades are in existing leagues, and it kind of helps you navigate in your leagues. So we have 4 popular trade targets we're going to get to eventually. But Dan, of course, we got to start with some news that came out today. Christian McCaffrey, he hits the IR. It sounds like at least 6 weeks. So pretty much he's shut down for the season here. And then I'm glad we recorded later tonight and we didn't bump up the timeline at my request as I typically do. Jordan Mason hit IR. So there's so many things happening here in San Francisco. CMC goes out. Okay. A lot of people that have CMC, myself included on several rosters, also have Jordan Mason. And they're like, okay, this is a plug and play situation. You lose McCaffrey. Okay. It stinks, but you have Jordan Mason. Well, now he's out with the high ankle sprain. He's on IR. It seems like it's Isaac Guerendo season. So before we get to Sir Isaac over there, Christian McCaffrey, Dan, a lot of questions in the Discord throughout the day. Hey, are we looking to sell just absolutely, dirt cheap, get him off my roster? Are we buying low? How are you navigating the situation?
I think we're still in, those stages of grief, in those 5 stages. I don't know if I've navigated completely through until probably tomorrow, JB. I definitely have at least, I think, 4 or 5 shares of McCaffrey throughout my rosters. And I think 1 or 2 of them, I did have Mason, to your point. Hey, outstanding. So now I got to look and say, all right, where are these rosters? If I was a contending team right now, this is hard, especially if I had Mason and now I have neither. How deep is my rosters? I saw one guy put James Cook on the block tonight in the league. I'm like, do I go CMC for maybe a James Cook, get a young stud back that's healthy? I don't know.
You got to add. You have to add. There's no way. Absolutely no way. Like, I'm talking about Christian McCaffrey all the way down. I'm scrolling here. Like in that running back 23 tier. That's where I am. And I know a lot of folks, there have been conversations with a lot of the players we've talked about, like Chris Olave, Brandon Ayuk. Hey, JB, whenever a player gets injured for a significant period of time, it seems like you might overreact at times and you really bring them down. But Christian McCaffrey, he's going to be 29 years old, Dan. We talked about this on last week's episode. Father Time is undefeated and it will always remain that way. He's 29. He's going to be 29 years old. We have the Achilles and the tendonitis and now this knee injury. So it's not like, okay, well, longer term is a question. At least I get the short-term production. We're not even getting that now. So you talk about like a James Cook situation, man, you got to be willing to add, and you got to add a pretty penny to be able to pivot off to a higher end running back like James Cook right now.
Yeah, I guess based on that analysis there probably tells me CMC is going to be sitting on a lot of my rosters. And I think for a lot of our listeners, if you're in safe leagues, you're already stuck. So you got to pray you have some of those Niners backups. If, you're in a lot of the leagues that we are where there is no trade deadline or it hasn't quite approached yet, I don't want to give them away, JB. I definitely want to sell. I'm more open to selling at a later price. He's 28 years old. He'll be 29 next summer. He is starting, to hit that running back cliff, which I'm worried about. I don't, even as awesome as Christian McCaffrey is, I don't think he's like a Derrick Henry that's just built different. I think he is human. We're seeing the injuries start to pile up. We went a half a season without him this year. And now it's, is this a compounding thing that, he came back too soon? Everything's kind of connected physically, and it's just, and then now he's got the PCL injury. Hey, he's got the whole offseason to rehab. Hopefully he can come back stronger and you still get it, a couple more seasons out of him. So I'm a little hesitant. I don't want to trade. I don't want to give him away, I guess is my point. But odds are probably keeping him on a lot of rosters unless I could get some kind of running back. I gave James Cook as an example. What do you give with a James Cook? Is it a second round pick? It's a team's probably, if they're looking to move Cook, they're obviously not contending, or they're looking to get some draft picks, some assets. I don't want to give my first round pick up. I'm a little stingy there.
No, I certainly would not be looking to add a first to James, or add a first to Christian McCaffrey to get James Cook. But here's the thing with the whole situation. We always talk about this, and I love my buckets. I always put my players in certain buckets based on the criteria that they fit in. With Christian McCaffrey, a contending team is not going to pay the price that you're looking for in return because he's not active. A rebuilding team in most situations is not going to want a Christian McCaffrey. The only situations I could really think of where a team might be looking at Christian McCaffrey is if they in fact are contending, but they don't need that production now. They're pretty set. Their roster looks good, but maybe they have some younger assets that just haven't really panned out up to this point. Maybe you can pivot off of Christian McCaffrey and go that route. Or and that's going to be few and far between, because again, if a team's contending, it's going to be very unlikely, even for pieces that they're not really using in their lineup today, to move off of for McCaffrey. But then I think the more likely situation, and it's going to be tough because it takes a very specific trade partner and situation, but a rebuilding team that has a running back that you could utilize if you're contending. Maybe they just were eliminated from the playoffs, with 1 week left here in the fantasy regular season. And maybe it looks like something like Christian McCaffrey plus a piece for Derrick Henry, an aging piece that they were trying to hang on to, maybe Christian McCaffrey plus a piece for Alvin Kamara. And right now, Dan, I think it is going to take that plus. And I don't know if you were just scratching your head because you were just so disgusted at the thought of having to add to Christian McCaffrey, or, maybe you're just taking it all in. I don't know. I don't know what's going on in your mind right now.
I'm thinking a lot of things. And I'm thinking, I came out too lofty with an example, and that's only because it was fresh in a league tonight where
no, absolutely
put Cook out there. So, maybe you drop down a tier. I think of, and I like where you're going with it, the team that's, hey, not going to make the playout. They're not going to win this year. They're looking at next year, middling type roster. Hey, let's take the points off their roster in this final stretch of the season. So hopefully their picks are a little bit higher, and they're getting rid of a running back that they could kind of live without last year, but is still attractive enough for us to say, hey, I don't want to just not want this guy next year. So maybe someone along the lines of and I still may be too high, but a Najee Harris or a Ramondre Stevenson, a Brian Robinson. I'm thinking of those young, kind of good backs, but they kind of have some warts where a lot of people don't necessarily want them or get excited about them, but good enough, JB, good enough where you wouldn't mind them on your roster. Kamara and Henry, like you said, are definitely good ones I think can help you win this year. Definitely, I think, have another year worth of, fantasy value on them, but they're a little bit in the older bucket. So I think you have that older bucket and then maybe a younger bucket, but still have some upside without being too attractive.
And some of the receivers that I'm thinking about, if we're going cross positionally, again, it's going to have to be from a team that either they were just hanging on to assets and your trade deadline is either approaching, or there is no trade deadline, or they were just eliminated from playoff contention. But the obvious guys, like a Cooper Kupp, a Tyreek Hill, a Calvin Ridley plus a small piece, maybe Courtland Sutton plus a small piece. So depending on how your roster is constructed, that might make sense. But also, Dan, there might be situations, and I know there's going to be some like this for me, where because of the value, whether it was in the startup, whether it was in existing leagues where the running back market was just so depressed, that I have a lot of teams built around running back. So, yeah, I'm missing out on McCaffrey, but I didn't have him for the first 9 weeks of the season, right? So it's not like I'm really missing out on all that much. So if you can weather the storm and there isn't a market, I think the most likely of outcomes for me, and probably you too, Dan, is that we're going to be hanging on to McCaffrey and hope that we can at least get production usable weeks next year, even if the longer term outlook, and it's like this for every running back, but even if the longer term outlook is not fantastic.
Agreed. I like the cross positional look first, because there are a lot of teams I've noticed across dynasty leagues where they are thin at running back, and now this might be their opportunity to actually get one at a good value. There are more rosters built with depth at receivers, so if you could get somebody there on a deep roster, it's worth looking at. If not, again, hey, wait a year, let the guy rehab, let the rumors swirling about him coming back, and you'll get more later on. And hopefully, like you said, we've went this long without him. Our rosters are strong enough to prevail.
Right. So Jordan Mason, like, he's going on IR. His value, all the value was built in with production with McCaffrey out. So his contract is up in, I believe it's 2024, but he's a restricted free agent. So he's probably going to be on that 49ers roster next year, but I'm not putting any stock in Jordan Mason. Like, I don't even know if I'd want to offer a fourth for him just in general. Like, that's where I am. Like, he went from being a potential mid-second value again, if we could use him over these next 4 weeks, to worthless. Because that's what, people talk about, well, it's dynasty, so you got to look ahead. But even though it's dynasty, the running backs, maybe a 1 year outlook. Sometimes it's a 4 week outlook for these guys. That's how quickly things change, especially when it's a running back like Jordan Mason, who now we can't use down the stretch.
Yeah, he went on the block, Jordan Mason, in so many of my leagues fast last year when CMC went down. And I was in negotiations in one league looking to get Mason where I didn't have him, and I did have CMC, and it was kind of lingering. And then boom, the news came out, and I was like, oh, slow down these negotiations. But to your point, I mean, he's 25. He's an undrafted free agent. I think we all believe he was a product of the system. He didn't get in there right away last year. I think the media was pushing Shanahan to say, hey, why aren't you playing this guy? And he was very stubborn before putting him out there. But like, even before McCaffrey came back, he started hot the first 4 weeks. And then for 4 weeks, Mason was kind of quiet, even without CMC in the picture. And I think there's just a little bit more to this 49ers team this year as well. Like, this is a broken 49ers team. So if they're not humming on all cylinders, I don't know if Sir Isaac, who we may talk about next, is even the answer. But Jordan Mason, certainly. I mean, 4th round, JB, like you said, maybe. If I had McCaffrey, I don't know.
Like, he's at the point now where, like, if there's a player of interest on the waiver wire, Jordan Mason would be a drop candidate for me if necessary. If there's an upside play, I don't see a situation where they go into it next year with CMC, Jordan Mason, Elijah Mitchell, Isaac Guerendo. Like, I don't think that's the case. So even if McCaffrey things go sour again, I don't think Jordan Mason returns much, if anything, moving forward.
I mean, the running back market could be pretty bad, though. I don't know where they're at with Isaac, how soon they want to see him be number 2, or if they like him at number 3. The one good thing about Mason is he's going on the IR with a sprained ankle. It's not going on the IR with an injury with the severity of Christian McCaffrey, where he's got to rehab it for a year. Like, if they were a playoff contending team, I think Mason would be back at the end of the year. But there's only 4 weeks left in the regular season. so he gets shelved for the Niners. But I think he's going to be a healthy back that I'd be a little slow to cut him, JB. Hopefully your league has IR spots and you could just place him there and have for next year. Oh, he's got the scissors out. I don't know, man. I'll hold the challenge flag because I don't think either of us are too hot and heavy over Jordan Mason, but I wouldn't cut.
No. And then that takes us to Isaac Guerendo, like maybe a pair of thirds if I'm running back hungry. But again, the way a lot of my teams are built, especially if we're in playoff contention here heading into week 14, I'm probably not hard pressed to bring on Isaac Guerendo to my roster. So like, I'm not moving a second. I could see the case for a pair of thirds.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd have to be running back desperate on my rosters. And if I was, in that third round range, pair of thirds, third and a fourth, third or fourth and some bum, something like that, we could work something out. I wouldn't mind him on the roster. He's flashed a bit when he's played this year when I've seen him, but I just feel like when the Niners are running the ball well, everybody looks good for kind of a minute there. And he's definitely has the opportunity now.
And he has that great speed. It's kind of what made him pop off here throughout the rookie evaluation process. He flashed there, and that caught a lot of people's eyes. And then when he landed in San Francisco, they have McCaffrey, but it's fairly wide open after that, and it just hasn't gotten the opportunity. But like, who's to say they don't just bring in a running back? Like, we've seen running backs come in off the street and produce for fantasy purposes. Kareem Hunt just did it. Like, Kareem Hunt did it. The Rams had somebody a few years ago. Oh my gosh. This is killing me. I don't want to spend time on it, but I'm gonna have to dig it up now and throw the name out. I'm sure folks are watching this right now saying it's so and so, you idiot. But
it's something. It's something, JB, to watch the market really closely this week, depending on the type of player they'd want to pick up. There's not a lot out there. I think like Leonard Fournette, my boy, is still I think the biggest name on the market. The Niners are more of a re-sign their own guys kind of team, like the Jerick McKinnons, or I'm not sure if a lot where Elijah Mitchell is these days. They normally like their kind of guys. So I think Isaac Guerendo has the first chance. The good news, even though I'm identifying San Francisco as a broken team at 5-7. Their whole NFC West division's kind of broken. They're still only 2 games behind Seattle, so they're not a given up kind of team right now. You mentioned Isaac Guerendo's speed. If he does pop off, JB, how fast and how finicky the dynasty market is. He could be a hot commodity just 1 week from now.
Was it Darrell Henderson? They brought him back.
Henderson, he had a little cup of tea there, so you say, where I definitely remember a lot of Darrell Henderson, flying on trade baits after a little stretch. The Rams are kind of like the Niners. They're those teams, those system teams that you just plug certain guys in and they become good for a while.
Yeah. And that's just the way the running back market is. It's who gets the opportunity this week. You see these plug and play options, these guys that you can just insert into your lineup whenever there's injuries, and you see these backups go for a third, and it's like, okay, well, they might only get 1 or 2 weeks, but now you have the player like Isaac Guerendo. I always want to call him Isaiah Guerendo, Isaac Guerendo, and maybe he gets at least the next month to really prove himself. So again, I would be cautious, but maybe test the waters. I've seen some trade baits where he's hitting for a second, like they want a second return. Absolutely not. Especially in super flex formats.
I'll take one kind of storyline here too, where maybe I would be a little more aggressive in trading that third and fourth, and they did invest in him. He's a 4th round pick. McCaffrey, we know, is 28, 29. They got to sign Purdy most likely to a pretty big contract. This is going to be a cash strapped team coming up here. Ayuk's going to be back. So I think they want that 4th round pick to pan out. So there is a path there, JB, where he's, the second to an injury riddled McCaffrey for a year or two, and then it becomes his show.
Yeah. There's certainly an opportunity there at hand for Isaac Guerendo to prove himself here.
We did have a league tonight that he went for a second, didn't he? Wasn't our boy Zeb? I think Ohio League or something. I think he moved a second for Sir Isaac, and everyone was like, "What is that? Is Zeb?" The jokes were cracking because I think he's got a 1-11 roster, trading someone else's second, not his own. So it's probably like a late second, but
it's
Isaac
also
went for a late second today.
Also a 10-team league.
10-team, yes. That's why
I'll be honest.
Some waves.
I didn't see the trade. With the number of leagues, I have to have all the chats muted unless I'm tagged. Then it pops up where I get a trade offer. But okay.
There's a scenario, and I think Zeb is hoping for that story, and we can say his name out loud because he's our boy. He knows that, but that's a late second and a 10-team for Isaac. He probably sees a path where Niners running back, 4th round, young, super fast, McCaffrey out for a year. There's a path there.
You could tell yourself that story. Absolutely. For me personally, it's just not a bet I'm willing to make. So hopefully 20 minutes in, running through some Christian McCaffrey news and situations and trade markets, what we'd be looking to do. Jordan Mason, Isaac Guerendo popping up here all of a sudden with an opportunity as we go into week 14, the final week of the fantasy football regular season. All right, on to some of the most popular trade targets over the last week. Jonnu Smith, 358 trades in the last week. And I filter it down based on Superflex, like 12-team and plus leagues. So there are some filters in there. But when we run through all of the players here and we say the number of trades, they all have that same filter. But Jonnu Smith, 358 trades in the last week. Dan, you look at these last 3 weeks for him, and we talked about him in passing last week. It was with the Tyreek Hill discussion. And of course, after he popped off against Green Bay this week, I had to put that little clip out there and say, Dan and I were talking about him, and he goes off again. This dude, he has 30 targets in the last 3 weeks. He's averaging 100 yards a game, a touchdown a game, like 8 receptions a game over the last 3 weeks. I think this continues. I really do. I'm looking at tight end premium leagues, and we're in a ton where it's 2 PPR for tight ends, where you have to start 2 and maybe you get a small premium as well. So the market is certainly inflated. I moved a share of Jonnu Smith on an absolute dumpster fire team, like just accumulating picks, 1 in 12, I think, up to this point. I moved him for a 2nd and a 3rd, I believe. I would pay that if contending as well. I think, and you'll see when we get to the trades here, there are still plenty of opportunities when you have these guys that seemingly haven't done all that much previously in their career, and then they start to pop, especially at the age of 29. There's bargains to be had.
Is that how old Jonnu is?
He's old. He's old. He's a grizzled vet.
I got to pull him up here right now. And that's, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. Like, I don't know if it was last episode on or off the air, but I used to be a Jonnu guy. And he's a freak of an athlete. Love Jonnu. And he could do some things after the catch. And it just went away sort of for a while. I mean, it was kind of flashes of it in Atlanta, but we were all frustrated because, we wanted it to be Kyle Pitts and it wasn't. He's created a market for himself. And I definitely think it's good for the rest of the year. Jonnu he's serving as this reminder for me, JB, of certain players that I need to stop disrespecting and get out of my own head. I wish I was drinking the Kool-Aid earlier because now it's kind of too late. Same thing with Jacoby Myers. Jacoby Myers is a good NFL wide receiver. Devontae Adams leaves. He just needed to be healthy, and he's getting number 1 volume. Just a guy that, again, could help your roster that you just don't want him on your roster where you could have had him so cheap where, why wouldn't you? I need to get there. Now, my only concern, long-term with Jonnu, and maybe it doesn't matter because he's making a market for himself. But
he's there next year, though.
Man, he's there next year. But here's my question. The reports are picking up steam, man, that this head coach is losing the locker room because the media loves stirring that up. What happens if he's gone? Who's the offensive coordinator there? Is it a whole new offense? Because Jonnu does feel like a product of this offensive system. And, Miami's head coach there, Mike McDaniel, he to me falls under that bucket where I just wish this dude was an offensive coordinator with a real good head coach to shut him up and just have him focus on calling plays, because he calls plays really good. Tua gets the ball out of his hands fast, and there's some fantasy value there. But he has a lousy head coach, John Bauer, and I just, I see this ship sinking at some point in Miami. I just don't know when it is.
I mean, he was just extended this year, though, wasn't he? Not to say they don't get rid of coaches very quickly. The leash has become very, very short, but at his current price, if contending, especially in tight end premium formats, he's a player that, based on when we always talk about production versus cost to acquire, this dude is a slam dunk for me. So let's very few trades here. I didn't want to completely inundate folks with trades, but people will be happy. Trades are back up on the screen here. So if you're listening on the podcast feed, check it out over on the YouTube channel as well here at DD Fantasy Football, throwing the trades up. If you're watching the video, make sure you hit that like button. I know you're already subscribed to the channel, and then leave some comments here. Any of these players, if you have actively been looking to acquire, if you're a contender, if you're looking to solidify that roster as we gear up for the playoffs, let us know in the comments. All right, Dan, Jonnu Smith in a 25 third, or J.K. Dobbins, who just hit IR, 12-team Superflex, start 11, PPR, extra half point for tight ends.
Dobbins is one of those guys weekly that I think of you, John Bauer, every week, because you and I have had some fun battles on the show from time to time where we're, in or out on a guy and making the case, and we'll go through a stretch like, I got JB. He didn't know what he was talking about with J.K. Dobbins, and then of course he gets hurt for the 18th year in a row, and John Bauer's I will never take an injury victory lap ever. Gotcha, which is fair.
Because there's dudes that I absolutely love, and they get injured, and there's nothing that grinds my gears more than seeing somebody tweet about somebody, and they're I said he was in a void. Well, the dude's injured. Okay, I get it. But dude, Dobbins looked good when he's been active. He's looked good.
He did, and I'll always give you that, JB. We can say a lot of things about you, but no one cannot say you're not classy. You always take the high road, no doubt about that.
I wouldn't say I'm classy, but at least when it comes to injuries,
you know what I mean. High ethical, moral grounds of fantasy football, but this is a tough one because I was, definitely on the Dobbins train. I am. I'm just so rooting for the guy. He looked really good. He's with a good team that's, believing in him. Yes.
Oh no, your mic's good. You're good. I saw you just check it.
Yeah, I was like, what did I do?
I want to look at all of these because I was thinking about this too when I was answering these in my head prior to the show. I want to look at all of these as if we are contending. So just keep that in mind as we're going through these. All right.
Look, from a contending standpoint, knowing that he's shelved, I was a little, it's a half point premium in this example you're given. So I'm like, sometimes that shies me a little bit away from the tight ends. But if I'm contending and I need a tight end, I want Jonnu the rest of the way. I feel like my investment's protected a little bit with that third, which is nice because it's a start 11 league. So I like that extra depth piece. So I'll go Jonnu in a third here. It is close for me, but contending, I'll take the tight end who's going to score versus the running back who's shelved.
But I'm even thinking about it in general. I agree. I'm taking Jonnu there. But think about Dallas Goedert, Mark Andrews. They're 29 years old, same age as Jonnu Smith. Think about their price overall and the trades we see involving those types of players. Sure, the market is kind of softened on Dallas Goedert because of the injury. Andrews, he's kind of returning to form a little bit, but neither are giving them anything over Jonnu Smith. And Jonnu Smith has been more productive. And I just think about the age, the contracts, the situation, the ceiling. Yes, if McDaniel is not there in 25 for some reason, or the offense, they take a philosophical shift. Yeah, it's going to hurt. But like you said, Jonnu Smith is just the perfect tight end in that system, an athletic freak. We saw in every stop along the way, Tennessee, New England, Atlanta. Coming out of college, he has that rasp. Like everything about him screams athletic monster. And like you think about all the players Miami has, it's all speed. Running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, it's everywhere.
Yeah, he fits that perfect. And, you give these examples, even a non-athletic freak. And I joke with you only because I know you've had a history of a lot of rostership of Austin Hooper. But given the opportunity in some deep leagues, he's helping you as he's scoring. He's being utilized. So
he's a top 10 tight end over the last month, Dan.
I can't even understand that, Somewhere in an alternative universe, ladies and gentlemen, like in JB's fantasy world, Russell Wilson and Austin Hooper is actually helping JB win money. Like he's putting his roster where he needs.
In that universe, they're on the same team. Maybe here in Pittsburgh.
Enjoy, friend. Enjoy. I give you that. But Jonnu, who's even more athletic than Austin Hooper, he did well, even if things did kind of change in Miami. I mean, he did show he could produce in Atlanta. He's going to be good for a few years. Again, 1.5 is enough. I would take that investment there. So good trade for that side of the deal.
Remember, as we're going through all of this, I have my Dynasty tiers over at DD Fantasy Football. They're within the Discord. 50% off the first month. Use the code, use the link in the episode description. I got my cross-positional Dynasty tiers, which are constantly updated. We have the War Machine on the ddfantasyfootball.com site. We have the Trinity tool, which we reference pretty much every single week, especially on the Sunday morning winning the week episodes. And then 8 and now maybe 9 bonus episodes within the Discord. So come check it out. Half off the first month. Click the link below. And I know you already hit like on this video, so no worries there. All right, Dan. Jonnu Smith for a 25-second, going up a little bit. 12-team Superflex, start 10 PPR, but you're getting the extra point for tight ends.
We're at the full premium, which I love. So if I need a tight end and I am going for the money, I will take Jonnu. If I have another tight end and I don't need Jonnu, I would rather the second. But contending, team need, full tight end premium, I'll roll the dice and go with Jonnu.
Again, we're looking at this as contenders in all of these trades. I'm smashing Jonnu Smith here. Now, again, I just talked about a few minutes ago where I was on the other side recently. Like, it's a trade that makes sense both ways, especially if you're at the very end of the season here. You're trying to shed potential points from your roster. You're in a battle for that 101, 102, whatever the case may be. It makes sense both ways. And I just think Jonnu Smith, he's somebody that's going to produce the rest of this season, and price to acquire versus the production, it's there. All right, Dan, this next guy gets me all hot and bothered. Courtland Sutton, 271 trades in the last week. Wide receiver 4 over the last 5 weeks, not including week 13, because as we always say, we're recording during the Monday Night Football game here. But this dude, he's been an absolute monster. 10 targets, 8, 9, 10, 11, 97 yards, 78, 70, 122, 100. He's pacing for 100 yards tonight and 3 touchdowns over that stretch. He's found himself a quarterback finally. Bo Nix loves him. What are your thoughts on Courtland Sutton?
Yeah, 3 for 43 while we're live on the air here. Still in the second quarter only of the game tonight, making some clutch catches. Here's a receiver that, although he is age 29, as of October, I think you're getting his best years in a good situation. Coach Payton, even though he was rebuilding this team, says, we are not letting you go. We want you with our quarterback situation. They kept and believed in Sutton, and he is just producing week in, week out with Bo Nix. He's an awesome dude. I think I mentioned this in a previous episode. We had the one week 7 dud, and it was nothing to do with him. It was just like game plan. And I remember Coach Payton apologizing to him at the end, which Coach Payton doesn't have to do. And he was smiling and laughing Sutton because they won. And then the next week's, Coach made it up to him, and he goes 8 for 100. And he's
that's when the stretch started. That's when the stretch started.
And then the stretch started. And
yes.
I'm watching him play, and I mean, he looks spry, man. And Denver's a team that's on the rise. So I think for Courtland Sutton, he's just in the right situation at the right time where I see no reason why Denver's not going to hang on to him for a year or two. He's kind of like a James Conner of receivers. You know what I mean? The guy's producing. He's taking care of his body. He's in a good situation. You're going to get a couple of good years out of him. So if you're a contender, you want Courtland Sutton on your teams.
Talk about the Trinity tool. He's been like a top 3 to 5 wide receiver just consistently, especially since that game that Dan referenced, the 0 target game. And that's when he really has turned it on, and he's been phenomenal. So a couple trades here, and this kind of shows you, like, there were a lot of trades right at this price point. So I would go test the market. Again, it's going to be very difficult if a contender has Courtland Sutton. It's going to be difficult to do something centered around a pick. But again, maybe something cross-positionally, depending on roster construction for both you and your potential trade partner. Dan, Courtland Sutton for a 26-second, 12-team Superflex start 12, full PPR.
Yeah, I'm surprised I'm saying this as I watch Jameis Winston just throw a pick six, JB. Anyway, Courtland Sutton for a 26-second. That's like an eternity away for me. I value that 26-second as like a third today. And as we just talked about before, Sutton, you plan on getting 2 good years out of him. You can have that pick. I'm going to get my couple years of Courtland Sutton on my contending roster. I will not miss that pick. I should get my return on investment. So that's just too long away, too long ahead. Give me Sutton.
Now we want to kick it up a little bit here because I assume that you were going to go that way. I know I was going that way as well. Sutton for Mechie and a 25-second, 12-team Superflex. Just start 10 here, but full PPR.
All right. So now it's a little bit closer, and you're kicking back a young receiver that's, starting to come around a little bit. But I still don't see Mechie as having really much or any value, especially the way the Texans are kind of playing. Now, a second next year, I'm contending, so that second's probably going to be late. I'll take Sutton over the late second in Mechie. If it's early mid, that's gonna. I don't want to hold on to Sutton too long and get stuck with that aging wide receiver either, JB. So it depends where that second is.
Yeah, it's crazy because it happens with Jonnu Smith. Again, I cashed out that second price, but it's happening with Courtland Sutton because I have 25 to 30% exposure across my dynasty leagues. And there's a few that aren't contending. The trade deadline hasn't passed. And I've had people say, well, what are you looking for Sutton? Which obviously I love how that conversation starts. But then I had one person come to me immediately after asking and said, hey, I checked a few things like Fantasy Calc, KTC, didn't realize his value went up that high. I'm probably not interested anymore. So people want him. They just don't want to pay for him, even though he's giving you that production. And it kind of leads us into this next guy, but Mike Evans, 195 trades over the last week. And it's funny because people are willing to pay the first for Evans, but they're having a really hard time paying the second for Sutton. Both 29 years old. That's a lie. Mike Evans is 31. Evans is 31. Oof. As soon as I started to say it, I was like, that is not right. So Mike, a 2-year gap there. And plus, people are far more willing to pay the price for Evans than they are Sutton. And that market inefficiency and that discrepancy there, like if I had to decide, I think I prefer Sutton at his lower price than Evans if I had to move a first.
Yeah. And again, I think Sutton falls in that Jonnu Smith, Jacoby Myers category we were talking about. It's like, hey, stop the hate on these guys. Get them on your roster because you get them at a good value, especially if you did when the timing was right. Mike Evans is in some ways similar because he's in a great situation in Tampa Bay, but if you're a contender and you're getting a receiver, Baker Mayfield's number one receiver, the way that offense has been throwing the last couple years, and there's no reason to say Evans won't do it again next year. I think you want him. I think you do have to be a little careful to overpay because you do worry about injuries, starting to sneak up with Mike Evans. But overall, I think you want him on your roster. When he's been healthy overall, you're going to get those big splash weeks.
So I want to do this as we go through all four players, but between Jonnu Smith, let's assume 2 PPR for tight ends, and Courtland Sutton, based on the trades we talked about and the prices we've discussed, if they were both available, because obviously that's not the case in every league, if they're both available at their respective price, and you can't say you'll take both, who would you prefer? So what order at their price? Sutton or Jonnu Smith?
I thought you were giving me Sutton and Jonnu for Mike Evans. I was like, deal, but you're not. Who'd I like at their price, JB? I'd be a Sutton guy. I think he's the best of all worlds there. Jonnu would probably be second if it's a full tight end premium, and then it would be Mike Evans. Because again, Mike Evans is hitting that window where if you don't get something for him soon, you're not getting anything at all at some point. He's could be nearing that Devontae Adams category. Not there yet.
You just stole the words out of my mouth. Like I'm staring at Devontae Adams, wide receiver 43 on Fantasy Calc. Like he's getting, right there. Luckily, he didn't have the move mid-season. Who would have known that moving from Gardner Minshew / Aiden O'Connell to Aaron Rodgers was going to be a downgrade for Devontae Adams, but here we are. So now it brings us to Mike Evans. First trade on the docket, Godwin in a 25-second or Mike Evans, 12-team Superflex start 10 PPR. And we're contending.
Ooh. I mean, if we're contending, and boy, I'm going to, if I need to get into the playoffs, if I'm a little on the cusp or whatever the case may be too, they got a nice juicy matchup versus the Raiders maybe this week, Chargers next week, then the Cowboys. I think I could, if I really, really need Mike Evans. So I think that contending depends, like JB, if I need to have him. And at week 14, there's a lot of buys this week, 6 teams on a bye. You may really need Mike Evans. So I'd say if you really need him, if you're contending and really need him, I'd be willing to pull the trade. But if you could survive without him, I'd rather keep Godwin in that second next year.
All right. Evans for Wandale in a 25-second. 12-team Superflex start 11 PPR. So you talk about the buys. We have so many injuries. This being a start 11 situation, are you looking to bring Evans into that price?
This one breaks my heart a little bit, but sadly, I would definitely take Mike Evans here. Wandale just hasn't quite been what I hoped. And I don't know how, but I think some of that could be situationally. I mean, he's still getting peppered and he's getting some targets, and it's not like he's not getting any points and is irrelevant. But I was hoping for a little more production from Wandale than we've gotten this year. Start 11 too come next year. I lean Evans a little bit on this one, but because next year, if Godwin's back and healthy, he's a stud with Baker again, and those two are having those big games. Although Godwin's injuries are starting to mount a little bit too, but he's younger, but he's had some serious injuries. So that's an uphill battle, now I'm talking out both sides, JB. It's kind of, if you need Evans to contend, I'm going with him again. If you could go without, maybe I hang on to my boy Wandale, because sometimes I give up on my boys too soon, Jonnu Smith, and look what happens.
That's why you refuse to give up on the Trembler.
Look at the air yards he got, or the miles he put in those routes. No, actually, I did watch that game, and I took him as a sleeper in DraftKings, and he had, what was he, like 5 for 70 or something, 5 for 77 this week or something. He was a relevant dynasty player, and I did start him like you did Austin Hooper, JB. I started a couple Trembler shares, who's only like 22 or 23 years old, and he produced. So never give up right away. But
I can tell you, Tommy Tremble, he's one of those guys that's in my blind spot. Like, I just don't pay attention to anything. And unless he, in the game day chat, Dan always pops in. If Tremble has any type of production, Dan's going to be in there. All right, Evans.
I got it. You got me on a little tangent here, so I apologize. But for our listeners, like, unless you're a Notre Dame fan, you probably don't want Trembler. But we're in a lot of those deeper leagues where he kind of hangs in there like a rash, and he comes in handy now and then. Now he's been injured for a while, and I think Jatavian Sanders is looking like the future there. I like the way Sanders was. He's just got so much more size. But I think this is truly a 2 tight end team. And you're going to see some of that 2 tight end production. And if one gets hurt, I think the other is going to get a lot of volume. So as you manage your deeper rosters, I think there's some value for those guys. But back to Mike Evans and this trade you have here now, JB, J.K. Dobbins and Rashad Bateman. I kind of like Bateman. He's been producing with Lamar this year. Now he got hurt again this week. He's not one of those guys like Dobbins. You got to go along for the roller coaster there. But start 11. If Dobbins is back healthy next year and he's the Chargers back again and Bateman's doing what he does this year, oh, man, I'm going to still lean the Mike Evans side.
Yeah, this is one of the easier ones for me. But again, that kind of goes to what our baseline of J.K. Dobbins was, like Dan referenced earlier. So I would go Evans there.
In the spirit of the Christmas season, it's like the land of the misfits with Bateman and Dobbins. So you go with Evans, the misfit toys.
Yeah, my name's Charlie. Nobody wants a Charlie in the box. It's my
that was the Charlie in the box trade.
That's the Charlie in the box trade. That's exactly it. My voice is still a little hoarse. That impression, I could do it a little bit better, but that's what we're sticking with today. Mike Evans for 26 first, 12-team Superflex, start 10 PPR.
This was where it doesn't even become close, contender, pretender, whatever. I want that first. Again, if you were desperate and you have a chance to win a money in a higher stakes dynasty league where that first prize money is pretty hefty, 26 first is 2 years away. I see a path where maybe you take Mike Evans if you really, really need him and you're going for that pot. But otherwise, I love that first. You're getting out of an older receiver and getting yourself a first, which is ultimately what you want.
So the very next one for a 25 first. So if it's the 26 first, let's assume it's a little bit more random because, the further out it is, the more variance it can have. 25 first, are you maybe a little more likely to move the pick, or just because it's sooner, even though it's not going to be as random, if you will? Like how are you viewing that random 26 first versus the probable later 25 first?
So like the 26 first, it's like a combination of that variance, and it's just an asset that you can't do anything with for 2 years. I'm more aggressive on my rosters where I kind of look at that as like a second round pick. Now you look at a 25 first next year, just the value is more to me. So I'd rather, again, here's the opportunity to get out of that older receiver and get yourself an immediate asset in a 25 first to rebuild your team, or however you want to do it. Maybe you're deep and you could just move a Mike Evans and you're a contending team and you're getting a first next year. Exactly. Now my contending team is getting some future in it. I love those kind of rosters. So I'm going to go with the first here. Again, you could definitely make a storyline, JB, where Evans could help you, but I would lean the first.
It's kind of how we talked about with Christian McCaffrey. If you have enough depth and you weren't relying on him, even if you are a contender, if the price is right, looking to possibly acquire him. Although I'm going to be very cautious in acquiring a Christian McCaffrey, or holding him if the price was not right, even though you're contending. I like what you're saying there, Dan, and I think it kind of ties into the Courtland Sutton conversation where, assuming everybody's available, which obviously is never the case, move Evans for that first, go get Sutton for that second. I think that's a win-win. Well, it's a win-win-lose because it's a win for you for value. It's a win for you for production. It's a lose for the trade partner. So win-win-lose.
There you go. I like that.
But then that could also be a win-win-win because if the trade partner loses, it's just naturally a win for you. Anyway, I digress.
Now you've lost everybody, but gotcha.
I've lost myself. That happens often. Looking at the guys we've talked about so far, and I think you answered this already, and it kind of led into Mike Evans, but at their respective prices in a typical 12-team PPR extra point for tight ends, value-wise, you prefer Sutton, Jonnu, Mike Evans in that order?
In a full tight end premium, yes.
Right. Okay. And then if that switches to a half-point tight end premium, do you switch Evans and Jonnu?
I do, because Evans is close to me. I mean, I love like Mike Evans when he's healthy.
Okay. All right. And then finally, and I always go back, I've said this before, but I go back to recent episodes. I check the timestamps. I'm like, okay, did we talk about this player recently? Because I know this is one of your guys. Courtland Sutton, I did it for him too. I was like, I feel like we talk about him every week. And I'm like, no, we didn't. Maybe just in my head, I'm having those conversations, trying to talk to my wife about Courtland Sutton.
How'd that go?
It doesn't go well, but whenever I'm trying to talk dirty, sometimes maybe I drop Courtland Sutton's name in there. Never works. But anyway, Tony Pollard, 173 trades in the last week. We talk about remaining schedule. He's got the Jags twice, the Bengals, who are giving up 94 points a week, and then the Indianapolis Colts, who can make any game interesting. Like, I know you were in on Tony Pollard. Is there anything we've seen, despite the game script here against Washington this past week, that really took things out of hand early? Anything you've seen from Tony Pollard that's made you get away from your values and your thoughts on him?
No, I've been hanging on to him for this stretch, and hey, it was 21 points a week ago versus the Texans. Unfortunately, things went south quick versus Washington, which, I mean, hey, overall this year has been a pretty good football team, especially at home. They just hopped on it in the game script changes, and the volume wasn't there for him. We do know he's better when there's no Spears at all in the picture. But the next few weeks, I mean, it's the Jaguars next week. They're not going to get up on him like the Commanders did. The Bengals the week after, who knows? The Colts should be a good, favorable game for Tony Pollard as they give up yards on the ground. So I like TP. He's 27. He'll be 28 next season. I think we're hitting, we got a few good years. I think that if the Titans could do some things to improve next year, I think he's going to maintain that value next year. So a contending team this year, JB, if I could get him at a good, fair cost down the stretch, I don't want to overpay because, again, he's not a 24, 25-year-old back. He's 27. He may not get a third contract. But at a value, I would like him for the stretch run, and I'd still feel confident in him next year. Even hoping next year Tennessee still has a middling type schedule, and the Titans hopefully can improve for him.
I am just so hesitant, and I had this note with Christian McCaffrey, but I think it ties in a little bit better here. I am so hesitant on just the running back market in general, and this isn't anything like it's not a revelation by any means, but this 25 class, there's a lot of talent coming in at the running back position, and we know the way the position just cycles through, and we have free agents, we have the incoming rookies, we have guys hit that age cliff, we have more and more committees every single season. It seems like there might be 10 running backs, maybe, that if you're like, okay, here's a 109 to 112, anywhere in there, maybe you lose in the semifinals, maybe win the championship. So it's in that range. Really only 10 backs I want over that late first. And I'm not saying Tony Pollard or a late first by any means. I'm not suggesting you were saying that either, but it's just so tough looking at the potential reward versus the risk when you talk about so many of these backs and what these teams might do next year. They could be nuked right off the bat early in 25. And even guys that people are loving right now, Chase Brown, Bucky Irving, we don't know what these teams are going to do. Now, seemingly, they're in good situations. Both of those teams have holes elsewhere. So you would think maybe they don't go with a running back early, but even third or fourth, fifth round picks this year being 2025, there's going to be talent there and there's going to be upside. It's not going to be like the class we saw here, where now like the premier guys are Bucky Irving and Tyrone Tracy. It looks like who that wasn't on many folks' bingo card coming into the season. So just in general, we've talked about a tight end. We've talked about 2 wide receivers. Even if you are looking to make a late season push or solidify that roster, kind of make sure that you're set when the playoffs come, especially if you have a trade deadline before, just be very cautious when it comes to the price you're paying for running backs. All that said, I have Tony Pollard in green on the cross positional tiers, and I say green means buy. Like his price is still too low based on the production you're getting.
I agree. And I think right now, I'm playing Pollard. Like, again, I'm cautious where you are, JB. And I've probably been more cautious to get rid of them because I'm happy with that value and I want to give him away. I'm definitely cautious in trying to acquire him. Like, to me, that I did that already. I got my Pollard shares. I'm happy. I'm good. I would bet on him being one that, like, I don't see the Titans invest. And we could always be wrong. We've been wrong before. But I don't see the Titans as a team investing in running back. I think they got their guy in TP. I think Spears, they're happy with their number 2 even. I think some of these teams invested in a number 2 and they've really panned out in the Bucky Irvins and the Tyrone Tracy's. So, like, that's good for them. But I think it's, I might be a little nervous if I'm a Javonte Williams owner. I think if I'm the Raiders, we expect to get somebody. I'd be nervous if I'm a Rico Dowdle owner. There are some teams that I think, I think we'll be able to project, and hopefully they'll fill up that sweet 25 class you're talking about without interfering with any of our boys on our rosters. So we'll see.
We'll see how that plays out. It never goes well, I'll tell you that. Every year somebody's nuked and I'm just like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. All right, let's get into some Tony Pollard trades. Tony Pollard and Tank Dell for a 26 first, 12-team Superflex start 11 PPR.
Yeah, this might be the most perplexing trade in the world here because, I like Pollard. I like Tank Dell. Even this week, I'm like, all right, this is the week Tank Dell goes good. I'm seeing some stats here and there that he's looking really good. It just hasn't quite come together in the numbers. This is the week. And every week, this is the week. And every week passes, JB.
It's never the week.
It's never the week. So, like, I don't know how long we can wait for this. Is this just the thing of, hey, they need to fix their offensive line and that's not going to happen to next year? Is it a little bit of a shift with Joe Mixon? They didn't have a Joe Mixon last year. They tried to force that running game with Damian Pierce, and it never came to fruition. I mean, even the Bills are shifting more with James Cook. And, like, luckily, Josh Allen's so freaking talented. He gets production no matter how much they run the ball. But I'm a little bit worried about Tank Dell as far as having, the value we'd hope for. If you asked me at the beginning of the year, I would say Pollard and Dell. 100,000%. But now I'm getting a little concerned. But start 11, we said we're going from the contenders view. So for tonight, JB, I'll go with Pollard and Dell, but I might miss that first very much in 2026.
It's I couldn't make the move involving my first. Again, there's a good chance, because I have rosters like this. I think you have rosters like this, where you've been putting yourself in a situation from the offseason all the way through week 13 now, where you've been liquidating assets that rebuilding teams might want. So maybe you don't have any 25 picks. Maybe you don't have a lot of youth on the roster, but now you're looking to get into that 26 treasure chest over there of picks. I couldn't do it personally. I know we're in this episode specifically, we're looking to get points and we're talking about these popular trade targets. Despite loving Pollard, I don't love him enough where he's the centerpiece in a trade where a 25 or 26 first is involved. There's just too much unknown. And hopefully there is something else with another league mate that could potentially happen where you can hang on to that first and get very close to that replacement production that we're looking at here.
I think when I look at this trade too, if I am pulling it for Pollard and Dell, because normally I do go from the perspective, JB, if I'm trading a 26 first, we play in the leagues that there's a lot of league integrity, and we want to make sure those dynasty leagues are a good time. So you have to pay for 2026 now today in 2025. And if I'm going to empty my bank account now for 2026, it's got to be a really good deal. So there has been in most of my leagues, even though teams know I like to trade picks, I'm normally saying no to 2026. But if I have a real thin running back room and I just lost McCaffrey and I'm really concerned I'm going to be able to win this year, and you're going to give me Pollard and Dell, again, this is the kind of trade that might entice me, but it would definitely not only be it'd be contending and I have a need. Like, it's really going to help me. So that's where I'm at on that one. So,
and that's start 11. It's start 11, so maybe it leans you a little bit there. So I get it.
Two assets.
Yeah.
And they're young.
You'll see like here, one of them, Pollard for Darnold, 12-team super flex start 11 PPR. I would go unless just I'm in a quarterback crunch. So maybe this is a trade that certainly works both ways. And maybe you've explored other options. The quarterback market's pretty tight and there aren't options out there. Maybe I get the Sam Darnold side, but in most situations, I would go Tony Pollard straight up, especially with it being start 11, where you have the additional positional player that you need to start. It skews the value a little bit when you talk about these mid-tier quarterbacks versus running back, wide receiver, tight end.
Agree with everything you said there. I was consuming some fantasy content today, and I listened to this one scenario where they were talking about Darnold. The Vikings are 10-2, and the Niners are 5-7, and they're about to unload a big salary for Purdy. They're like, do you pay Purdy that big salary or Sam Darnold on a bargain? Like, how interesting is that really to think about? But for our dynasty fantasy world, most likely Purdy's going to get paid the loot, and we are here just at the mercy of wherever the market is for Sam Darnold next year. And a lot of these players we're talking about tonight, man, if they're in the right situation, they're good. If they're not in the right situation, we've seen that value drop. So Darnold's a gamble. And right now at this point in the season, I'm with you. I would take Pollard.
And the 2025, and at this point, I mean, it's super early, but the 2026 quarterback classes, we could see some of these guys floating around. Like Jonnu Smith has that deflated value, but obviously, he's playing well. Derek Carr, I know nobody ever wants him, but these guys are going to be sticking around. I mean, hell, Jameis Winston might land himself somewhere and get that 2-year contract somewhere and see how it goes. So yes, there is the opportunity there, but with the assumption I do not need a quarterback. And here's the thing too. I put the bubbles on the show notes from Dynasty Daddy. There isn't one quarterback on that list.
How about that?
There is not one quarterback that is, what are there, 40 dots on there?
Yeah.
That in the last week is a most traded player. And I think it's a few reasons. This could be a completely another episode probably. But with the quarterback position, we really haven't seen too many injuries, knock on wood, like Dak Prescott, but he's either people probably just stashed him away or they moved him pretty quickly if they were needing production. A JJ McCarthy, something like that. But even the Jameis Winstons, the Derek Carrs, people aren't necessarily going out and acquiring them because if they're contending, they probably already feel really good about the quarterback position. So now they're looking at these older assets that are fairly cheap, like a Jonnu Smith, Courtland Sutton, Tony Pollard, etc.
Yeah, the quarterback market kind of happens like that. There are guys on the market because someone just got hurt and then it's resolved and then we don't see it for a while. Where a lot of these guys we see on the market they're in the trade bait every single week. Very often just the price kind of goes up and down based on production.
I had Gus Edwards in the show notes at first because he's one of the larger dots, but I was like, I don't want to talk about Gus Edwards. So I bumped him out of there. All right, last trade. I hope everybody got something out of these conversations. Again, I don't care if you agree or disagree with us. If it gets something spinning in your head, if it sparks an idea, that's a win for me.
Yep. Tony
Pollard, Adam Thielen for Ricky Pearsall. 12-team Superflex, start 13. Asterisk, disclaimer, exclamation point, start 13, PPR. This might be the easiest. This might be the easiest one for me.
I'm Pollard Thielen, even without Thielen.
Smash.
I just, Pearsall's just that. Even if something breaks in San Fran next year, maybe they move on from Debo. I'm not sure where they're at. They got to figure some things out. But the production you're going to get out of Pollard these next couple of years compared to Pearsall, I'm not that high on Pearsall where I don't see that ceiling.
I'm there with you. That might have been
one of the
easier ones. We are a united front here on Dynasty Theory, at least for some of these questions. All right, Dan, for the 271st time, final thoughts. Week 13 is now in our rearview mirror. Final week of the fantasy football regular season is upon us. What do you got for our listeners?
Man, creeping up on 300 episodes. That's exciting. And we are creeping up on week 14, which is huge. A reminder, 6 bye weeks in week 14. So you really got to be ready to manage through that. It's going to be an interesting week coming up. Manage your rosters wisely. And boy, watch the market. Man, we talked about so many guys tonight, JB, that, boy, look at how their value changes depending on what team they're with, who's coaching, who their quarterback is. Mm-hmm. So don't give up on players too soon. Be really mindful of kind of situation before you get on or off a player. And hopefully our listeners enjoyed tonight.
Yeah, talking about several popular trade targets, Christian McCaffrey, the impact that it's going to have there from a running back perspective in San Francisco. Hopefully you all enjoyed this week's episode. For Dan Lamagna, I'm John Bauer. And don't forget Mitch Sorensen. He's feeling a little ill, but hopefully Mitch fight through. We need you back next week, buddy. Hopefully you all enjoy this week's episode. We will catch everybody next week. Best of luck here to finish up week 13, and let's rock and roll in week 14. Peace.